to see the room filling up virtually. We're streaming live on YouTube right now as well. And this is Be Strong Families webinar series, Staying Strong and Positive for Ourselves and Our Children. I'm Kathy, and I am joining this meeting from Wadsworth, Illinois. And Dr. Judith Ehrman-Shapiro is here with me from Connecticut. And we want to know who you are and where you're joining from. So if you could, and please listen to this, if you could, I know you think you know already because you've done a lot of Zooms. Everybody's done a lot of Zooms. But you need to go to open the chat and then pick the second item on the drop-down menu. For me, it says panelists and attendees, and check that off before you say hi, like April did, because what happens, and like Andrew did, what happens if you don't is that only panelists can see you, and this is one of our major ways to communicate with each other. So Tammy, hello, Tammy from Pennsylvania, and April from Illinois. Welcome. Who else is here? We have 91 people signed up today. We have about 23 people in the room. Hi, Christy from Texas, and Becky. Oh, wow, everybody's doing it. Becky from Wilkes-Barre, and Ricardo from West Chicago, and Luz from Illinois, Jermaine from Amarillo. Welcome, Maria from New Bedford, Massachusetts, and Maggie from Cooperopolis, California. Did I pronounce that right? I'm very proud of myself. Hi, Veronica from Mississippi. Is that right? Mississippi is MS, not Missouri, right? Hi, Gladys from Illinois. And we're going to be getting started in just about 30 seconds. So Maggie, you're going to want to check that panelists and attendees. Maria, you're going to want to do panelists and attendees in the chat, just to, where it says two, it's the second item on the drop-down menu. And I'm here today with Dr. Judith Ehrman-Shapiro. This is our third day of our Navigating Grief and Loss series, or her Navigating Grief and Loss series. And today's topic is grief and self-care. So before we get started, we have a little poll to ask, were you at any of this week's webinars with Judith? And it's fine if you were, it's fine if you weren't, but we're just going to get from you early comers, you on timers, were you here with Judith previously? Please fill out the poll. And then I'm going to do the housekeeping, which is, this is a very interactive series, this Navigating Grief and Loss. And there are two ways to engage. One way is using the chat, which you're already doing. And that's why I keep saying it's so important to make sure that you're directing your comments to panelists and attendees. Otherwise, because of the nature of the topic, I'm going to keep anybody who does it only to panelists. I'm going to keep your information private and assume you meant only to tell Judith and me and Andrew. If you want to share with the whole group, be sure you go to the bottom where it says two and click the second item on the drop-down menu. And then the other way to engage in this webinar is to raise your hand. We can't see you, so you can't do it like I'm doing it. But if you raise your hand virtually, Andrew, who is our fabulous tech support person, will unmute you, and then you will unmute yourself, and then you'll be able to talk. So we have, Judith, results of the poll, 65-35, 65% yes, 35% no.
Good.
Let's go to the next slide before I turn it over to you. This is in recognition that we co-create the safe space together for us to be able to learn and grow and be vulnerable and open. We ask if people would agree to these agreements, to speak from their own experience, use I statements, treat other people the way you'd like to be treated, be here now without multitasking, and if you need a minute, take a minute and come back. So if you agree to these agreements, do what everybody's doing. And Maria, hi, Maria Long.
Hi, Christy.
Hi, Henna. Hi, Christy. If you agree to the agreements, Janan, you still have to do that panelists and attendees, all attendees, the second item on the drop-down menu. Gladys, well, wonderful. So I think we have consensus agreement, Judith. So thank you so much for being here. I didn't include any biographical information. All of that was on the Zoom registration, and We've talked about it before, but I do want to say that Judith is our like resident expert on grief or our resident teacher on grief.
I'm your personal death doula. I got you.
Well, and she has offered a lot of really great information in the past. And I just want to refer people to that, which is when COVID first started, Judith did a series of webinars on grief that was grounding and more academic, like in terms of just information. There's a PowerPoint with detailed slides. She's also done a webinar. She taught yoga for us too. And then she also did a whole webinar series on trauma and a way of liberation through trauma, which was really fabulous. And that's also available on our website. So Andrew's putting the bio in the chat. And I guess Andrew will also link the past webinars and recordings. So if you're interested in that, because what we're doing for this series is just much more interactive, much less, I mean, still grounded in her knowledge, but it's much more participatory than the previous ones in format. So thank you, Judith, and I'm getting ready to stretch.
Thank you. That's exactly what we're going to do. So those of you who have been with us, I like to start with a little bit of coming down from our heads into the body, a little bit of grounding, particularly when you talk about a topic such as grief. It's very easy to have the emotions, the experiences kind of carry us with them like a big wave coming into shore. But it really helps when we ground through the body. So what we've been doing this week is what I call the 6 movements of the spine, which are literally the 6 movements of the spine. So you can do this just with your head. Remember that the neck is part of your spine. It's the beginning of your spine. So if you're sitting in a restricted area, if you don't feel like moving or you don't feel comfortable moving, maybe just try doing your head, and I'll demonstrate maybe a more full-bodied way of doing these. So we're going to start, and whether you're seated or standing, by just dropping your chin to your chest. Just allow the chin to come to the chest and very slowly roll forward on your legs, maybe until your belly button just sits down on your legs, relaxing the back. Take a moment to flex the spine. Now, if you're standing, you can hang all the way over and just feel the release of the spine, feel the release of the back of the head. Oh, now I'm going to mess my hair up. There you go. And then when you're ready, taking a big breath at the bottom of the spine here, just begin to gently roll up by feeling the tailbone first, and then the middle of the back, then the upper part of the back, till you're all the way up to what I call your neutral. So it's just your neutral position. And then what we're going to do is a little arch back. So we're going to extend the spine. And if you're standing, what I like to do is hold on to my back for some support, and then just lean back for a little opening of the spine. You can do that right in your chair. Just lean back, look upwards, drop your shoulders down and back, open the spine, and then return back into neutral. So now we're just going to take the rotation of the spine. And one way to do this is stretch your fingers towards me or stretch them forwards. And then we're just going to go ahead as if you're scanning the horizons with your fingertips. Move those fingertips all the way over to the left side, looking over your left shoulder. And then gently scan the horizon, moving all the way back to your right side. And we're just rotating from the waist a little bit. So over one shoulder and over another. Let's just take that one more time. So if you're just doing your head, just look over your left shoulder, lining up maybe your chin with your shoulder, nice twist of the neck. And then come back forward so that you're looking off into the horizon. And then take the other side, moving your chin over your right shoulder. Oh, feels so good if your neck's feeling tight. And then we're going to do a little lateral raise. So picking up one arm, we're just going to put it over your head. And if you want, you can anchor your hand to the opposite side. If you're standing up, you can just pull the whole body to the side. Open up that side of your body. Come back up. I always tell people 10 fingers to the ceiling. And then go ahead and let yourself come over to the side. If you're sitting in a chair and just doing your neck, this is just dropping your ear towards your shoulder. Oh, let your neck and your jaw relax a little bit. And then inhale as you come up, growing longer in the spine. We always want to like decompress the spine a little bit. And then come over to the side. Over to the side, and then just rolling through your shoulders for a minute, maybe moving your jaw if your jaw feels tight, maybe taking your arms and just stretch in any direction that feels good. And then when you're ready, we'll get ready to start with our conversation about grief and self-care. Grief and self-care. So what I'd really like to do today is I would really like to hear from all of you. We can all contribute to this together about, in times of loss, any kind of loss, what has been helpful for you? What's been helpful for you to do for yourself or other people doing for you? You know, I was thinking about it myself, and I came up with, because I'm always thinking in this way, the 4 C's. So this is just a way to get your juices flowing. This means nothing. I thought about this last night, okay? The 4 C's I came up with. Number 1 on my hit parade during loss is compassion, right? That's number 1. People don't have to do anything for me. They just really have to extend an open heart, to hold me in their heart. It's like lighting a little candle inside. If I know that their presence is with me, it means so much. And believe it or not, we can do that for ourselves. So being self-compassionate, instead of always judging ourselves, I'm not doing it right, I'm doing this too hard, too much, not crying enough, not crying too much. How about just sitting in the room with ourselves? So for me, that all goes under the C, compassion. The second one for me is communication. And don't worry, all the wonderful things that you guys are typing right now, we're going to get to. So the second one for me is communication. You know, what we've been talking about in the last few days is so unique. All of our experiences are so unique. No one knows what you're going through if you can't share a little bit of it. And you don't have to share with everyone or share with people that you're not comfortable with. It's just finding a way to let people know what you need, where you are in the process, and maybe just saying, you know what, I'm not having a good day today, or I need a few minutes for myself, or you know, never assume that other people know what you need, because they don't. So compassion, communication, and for number 3, the 3 C for me is courage. That we all need courage to get up every day, right? To just get up every day and decide that we're going to engage with our grief in a way that's going to lead to our own evolution and growth. And that takes courage. So if courage has to do with strength, with faith, with belief, not in any particular thing, but just knowing that in time, things are going to change, to just keep, and people are always watching us, right? We people were our role models. We are other people's role models that look to us. So I think that healthy grieving requires courage. So compassion, communication, courage. And the last one may seem a little strange to you, although you're getting to know me pretty well at this point. The last one for me is creativity, actually, because we're entering into an area that's unknown. Every loss invites us into a time that we don't have a crystal ball about how it's going to go for us. So just being open to being creative, which means finding problem solving. This worked for me today, but I need something different tomorrow. I need time by myself. Guess what? Today I need to be in a crowd of people. But also, Kathy, I was thinking a lot about what you talked about, drawing with the crayons. And for me, part of my morning experience, I actually did a lot of collaging. I was cutting things out and putting them into collages. I saw that somebody already wrote music. So all of those are ways that we use our creativity in order to continue growing. So I thought I would start with that and now just open it up. I'm sure a lot of people are having a lot of thoughts.
Denise says walking, and April says listening to music. Nicole says cry and rest. Tammy says, I always appreciate when someone cooks for me when I'm dealing with heavy stuff.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think what, you're talking about compassion, self-compassion, communication, courage, and creativity. And I feel like other people are kind of talking about solitude and space, just like maybe that's part of compassion and self-compassion, but just the ability to disconnect from life and to be in the energy that is, with music, with walking, with crying and resting. It's nice being in nature. Janan says help talk it out. John doesn't want to put panelists and attendees, but she does make it clear that she wants it to go to everyone. So she says talk it out, talk out. So from Gladys says talking to others, not being by myself.
I really appreciate that each of these ways are ways that people have really, in an authentic, right, being real, in a way, have found that these are things that we can do for ourselves that are priceless, really, that you can't even put a price on. Giving yourself the time to take a walk, giving yourself the space and the permission to cry, to express how you're feeling, either by yourself or to other people, and to make that connection. I think that they're simple things in a way, but things that mean so much to each one of us when we're grieving.
Sometimes just having someone with me and holding space, talking or not talking, Tammy says. So
just having that someone close to you without having to talk, but if you want to talk, having that as available as well. I want to just comment on
I think Janine says giving others the grace to grieve with you. Others don't often know what to say to someone in their time of grief, so it's important to remain compassionate.
I love that word, grace. I really love it. I was just going to comment on who was it that said cooking. I really appreciate when someone cooks for me. Some research was done that showed that one of the most helpful things for people was people coming over and taking care of the house. Like there was a direct correlation between how depressed you got and how quickly people kind of came in and took care of the everyday things so that you can take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. So, the value of that is tremendous.
Yeah, I just had a situation like that today. This isn't about my self-care, but somebody close to me who's kind of a friend, and she's a person, well, she's very much of a friend. She's kind of a mentor and a lot of other things, but she recently lost her mother. And so I hadn't talked to her, and part of it was like, just we talked this morning, and she just wanted to talk. She just wanted, there's nothing like, just for me to listen. And then she's dealing with the funeral next week, and in LA, just so you know, like, it's kind of shocking. Like, her mother had paid for and put together a whole plan for how she wanted things to go, and the funeral home, because of COVID or whatever, isn't doing half of those things. So, and they also told her, she could be buried next Tuesday at 5 p.m. or you have to wait till August.
Oh my goodness.
Keeping people in refrigerator trucks in California. Anyway, I said, okay, so you're going to do it next Tuesday at 5 p.m. Do you want me to be there? Would it help for me to be there? And she said, I would love that. So she said, it's going to be expensive, though. It's the last minute. It's LA. But I think sometimes, like, just being willing to show up for a friend, and having somebody be willing to show up for you and not and sacrifice. I mean, I think it has to do with love languages too. Like, what makes you feel loved? Like, so if acts of service make you feel loved, then someone sacrificing. If quality time makes you feel loved, then somebody spending quality time with you.
And then just, what's interesting is that tomorrow we're going to talk about watching other people grieve. So that's a great segue for what we're going to talk about tomorrow. But if we turn around what you just said and direct it towards the topic of self-care, the part that we own as the people who are grieving is giving ourselves permission to say to Kathy, right? I know it's really expensive, but you're asking me if I want you here. And you know what? It would mean so much to me. So I think that's the piece of self-care, that we often get into this denial of self-need. And we do, I think there's a stoicism. We're stoic, we're strong, we can handle it, we can shoulder whatever comes into our lives. A lot of people feel that way anyway. And, the best way to grieve is to give yourself permission to at least have the conversation, like an honest conversation about what you can do for yourself.
Emmy says, yes, absolutely. If you know other people's love languages, that would be perfect to keep in mind. And keeping my own love language in mind, maybe I need to be okay with specifically asking for what I need and desire from others. I think that's always a good idea. And it's often hard for people. I get that. But sometimes I find with myself, you can get very upset that you're not getting what you want from someone, and you want them to just know what it is.
Absolutely.
I try to anticipate and offer, so that they don't have to ask. But sometimes, the asking, it can be simple. We make it really complex, but it can be simple. And being willing to take no for an answer without it, sometimes it's so hard to ask that when someone says, no, I'm sorry, I can't do it, it feels devastating because it was so hard to ask. But if you just get used to asking, and no is also an answer, and flowing with what people say.
Right. I mean, there's asking, and then there's what people can actually give. But we can actually, we will be able to contend. You would think we can contend with whatever the answer is. But the important thing is no one can read our minds. I mean, we can't, we all want to be known. We want people to know us. But nobody knows exactly what you need. And most people, turning it into tomorrow's discussion, most people are sitting there just feeling lost. Like, what can I do for you? What do you need? And it's so helpful to hear it.
And sometimes, like for me, I don't even know what I need. Like I'm used to taking care of myself and I don't even know what I need. When somebody asks me what I need, I don't know. It takes me a little while to figure out what I might need and then to ask. I mean, it's kind of weird because people think of me as very fast processing and very, whatever, smart and all that. But when it comes to like really knowing what I need or knowing what my feelings are, it's sometimes a process. And so it requires a conversation that can be a little messy conversation to get to what I really need. Like, because what I think I need on the surface isn't really what I need. Does that make sense?
Oh, that makes
resonate with that?
It makes so much sense. I'm working with a young man now who lost a partner suddenly. And he just keeps saying to me, I just want my partner back. I mean, it's that simple. Like right now, that's where he is. He just wants the person back. It's the one thing he knows he can't have. So never mind directing other people and telling them what they can do from him, right? It's almost a silly comment, but just addressing that to what you just said, it is a messy process.
And Tammy says it's kind of a tradition in our family to bring food when we can. It's a way of nurturing and relieving the burden of the person. People have to make the decision about what to make, shop, cook, etc. And I was thinking about that, Tammy, just in terms of what I was talking about yesterday, like traditional rituals. And that's what, again, with my friend whose mom died, they're Guatemalan. And so there's traditional foods. There's a traditional way that the reception is handled after the funeral. So it's like the disruption of that or the creation of that. It gives the family peace to be able to do it. And my friend is a boss and CEO, and she doesn't want to ask her staff. Her staff was like, let me help you. But it seems like not appropriate. So a person who is the person who helps other people and always there for other people, it can be really nice to have friends to come and say, like, I'll help get the tamales on the table, I'll help wash the dishes if that's what's needed. So
those things are not to be underrated by any. Can I pick your kids up at school? Can I do your grocery shopping? Let's do, what is that thing they do? Meal Train. Meal Train is the most wonderful social media program thing. I've done it for so many friends who are physically ill, but at times of loss, it's amazing. Yes, a hand.
Janine has her hand raised. Janine, we'd love to hear from you.
Hello, good afternoon. I just wanted to add to the conversation by saying that for me, ensuring that I have the right people around me, the people who kind of bring this energy or this presence of healing is important as well, because we know that we have very well-meaning friends or associates or co-workers, and everybody wants to flood in and they want to help. But I think an important part of self-care is just being able to express yourself and let certain people know that I really appreciate the offer, but I'm okay. I have the support I need. And then I think also there are times where you need someone else to advocate for you. So letting maybe a close friend or associate advocate on your behalf or kind of handle all of the floods of condolences that are coming in and the support that people are offering. Sometimes that in itself can be overwhelming. So just keeping in mind that if there is a close person to you that you can allow to advocate on your behalf for that short period of time is also helpful for self-care.
That makes so much sense to me. And Janine, what I'm also thinking when you're talking is that, do you ever have like those relatives or friends who they're very well-meaning, but they're very, very negative?
Yes.
And that can be so toxic at a time that you're trying to carry yourself one day to another,
And I think also, Judith, sometimes we just need another level of energy to kind of be around those friends. Some of our friends, they require a higher level of energy to just be in their presence. And those,
Right.
I think during your time of grief, that's just not the right time to be around those kind of people. So.
Right, right. I agree. And then, the last piece of that, you and I could talk about this forever, is say that the person has passed and someone didn't like them or
Yes.
is being critical towards them.
Yes.
And there's a right time and a wrong time for sharing that information, but not all people have those gateways,
Absolutely.
So making those choices because of that is also a wise decision.
Yes.
There's a little bit of discussion about meal train and mutual aid in the chat. And Tammy saying, when my sister broke her foot and had 3 young children at home, her church community came together and brought dinner every day for 3 weeks, complete with dessert. This was in response to the meal train idea. I know we used to do that, like for people who had babies, when they had babies, also for Shiva, when people die, that there's traditions, traditions in Judaism also about community care, collective care for individuals and families. So
yeah. And also, if you think about what goes into a day, I mean, what about a dog walker? I mean, you have no idea what that would mean to someone with a dog to say, I'm going to go walk your dog. I'm going to spend time with your cat, or, it means so much because our pets end up getting neglected and we don't mean it. We don't mean it at all. It's just we're not ourselves, So those kinds of things are really meaningful as well, incredibly meaningful, or to ask for those kinds of things, I should say. Another area, I just want to throw this in case people are cogitating or thinking right now, is the idea of legacy. So this is something, that I was introduced to, but, of something that's really meaningful in terms of self-care is to really think about that person as being present in your process, your transition into a time when they're not there physically. And what is their legacy? What would they want? What is their connection that you can bring forth? Who were they? To do things in honor or in name of that person. When you can't find your own will to get into the shower, you can't find your own will to go on, you say, well, you know what? Move through me, help me move, help me understand your legacy. Because for most of us, the people we lose, they don't want to destroy us. They don't want to destroy us through their loss. So we can carry that, and they call it continued bonds. We don't have to stop the bonds with other people. We have an option to continue them. And there's a lot of research being done that it's actually quite healthy at certain times to kind of key into that. So I don't know if that's meaningful for anyone.
Ashley says we have 3 days of Azah in Islam after we bury. Side note, our burials haven't been impacted much as we bury quite fast after death, but my friend whose family is Catholic just buried a relative in May who died in February. And I was wondering, Ashley, just that whole thing was, my understanding was, I was wondering how Frum Jews do it in LA right now too, because Jewish people bury, traditional Jews bury within 24 hours. So it has to, so I don't know, like, do they make exceptions for that? Or, what are they doing in California? Because my understanding is that it was the backlog, that they just couldn't keep up, because of the number of deaths. So, yeah. But she's curious too. Lives in a Jewish enclave. Yeah.
I'll tell you, it's really brutal when your traditions get disrupted. And they were talking about that, during World War I in Europe, like a devastating amount of the male population passed away. Whole towns worth of sons and fathers were lost. But what was also lost because of the war conditions was a lot of traditions around caring for that. Or then you also think of war, you think of like not having bodies or having to wait. And there was a real sense of people had real separation anxiety and real separation syndromes and real incomplete mourning around that, because they weren't able to connect with rituals, their rituals. So they are really important. Sometimes you can't find the meaning in them, but then they end up being like really meaningful because it gives you a guideline towards moving forward. And it is part of our self-care, I think. Yesterday, we were talking about kind of a new way to think about it is creating our own rituals that are more meaningful to us, or maybe meaningful to us in a more personal way, with regards to loss and memorializing people. So since there's a pause in the conversation, I'm going to go on and also say one thing in terms of self-care that I find really important is the topic of inspiration. Like how do we, when we feel so sad and so much loss, do you want to, I see there's
the rituals walk us through our grief. Ashley says, Janine says, a part of my father's legacy was the creation of this large extended family. I keep in contact with a sister I met for the first time at his memorial service. I also keep in contact with my stepmother and her family. Scrapbooking was also a way I preserved the legacy he created.
Yeah, that's very creative.
The creativity as well as the legacy piece.
And the continued bonds, moving through those continued bonds.
I like what Ashley said about these rituals walk us through our grief. I think that's really, we talked about walking through accountability last week with Ahmed, and Ashley was on those as well. But those walking us through our grief. I had an image, which when you said it's difficult when traditions get interrupted, it's because, or one reason is because that we're relying on them to walk with us through this. Like it's a support that exists, and that you rely on. And then, so when it's not there, then you're kind of thrown onto, needing to create it from nothing. And it's why it feels like a big loss, I think. And Margaret says, I work with families who may be experiencing grief because of CPS involvement or foster care, and I see how some of this can apply.
Absolutely.
But what about that kind of grief they experience, which is loss, but not death?
Yes. I do think this applies, and it's so overlooked. Talk about disenfranchised grief, right? We were talking yesterday about grief that isn't recognized. It's so painful to go through grief that isn't recognized. And I could see how that would really apply. And I also want to throw just this word in that there's been a lot of talk about the loss of indigenous cultures or the loss of original cultures, that part of what people lost in having their cultures taken away from them or having their cultures denied in a broader colonization of culture is they lose their rituals, they lose their languages, they lose their symbology, there's so many heavy losses, sometimes down to their ancestors, their connection to their ancestors, or the way that they connected to their ancestors. So it's a part of grieving that's been pointed out for the losses of indigenous peoples, primary peoples, first peoples in our worlds.
Yeah.
That loss of culture.
Well, yeah. And when people are in different places with relation to their traditions within the same family, like when some people are more tied to the indigenous ways, and then others have been converted to Catholicism, so that it gets really complicated.
Oh, it does get so complicated.
And Ashley is reminding us that there's a large-scale remembrance and liberation movement going on, which is phenomenal to witness. Yes, and it's phenomenal to witness, and it's also, that's what I was talking about, is within people that I know that are involved in that remembrance and liberation, it's not always welcomed by the people closest to them, or by their families, because of colonization and because of internalized oppression and internalized, just people have moved into different belief systems, so they share the biases of the mainstream culture about the indigenous ways, and it gets very complicated.
Yeah. Many of the ways we complicate a situation that's already, we don't do it, but it is complicated by these situations in the world circumstance. So I wanted to say something about inspiration, but this is something that I often go to, is that to remember, Kathy, to remember that we thrive even in adversity. So this is kind of like a huge area that's really becoming better recognized now, that there's the human ability to thrive despite being in disasters and terrorism and having loss, and in situations of physical illness or changes in family relationships. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that idea of thriving, that there are 5 areas that it's been noticed that people thrive in, and see if this resonates with you. Please comment or raise your hand. So one is social connection. And I think that comes up again and again in our conversation, that when we're in these adverse situations, we very often are able to recognize, to be in the presence of that social connection and what it means to us, even if people are just being in the same room with us and allowing us to express what it is we need. So that's social connection. But a second area is that we have an opportunity to recognize our own personal strengths. So there was once a young lady who was speaking to me, and she said, it was so hard for me in her situation of loss on an everyday basis, but I was somehow able to help others around me. So it was kind of a situation where a whole community was mourning the sudden loss of a young person. And she said when she was able to see herself helping other people, it increased her ability to be aware of her own personal strengths. But there may be many personal strengths that you become aware of in the process of encountering your own adversity or loss. That's 2 areas. So another is that people often find a sense of purpose when they're squeezed in these positions of tremendous suffering. So that, our life will take a direction, or we'll decide to devote time to something in a certain way. So it moves our sense of purpose in another way. That's 3 ways. A 4th way is just appreciation of life.
So go over that again, Judith, because I'm getting overwhelmed. There's
so many ways. So we're talking about, I'm trying to inspire you here. We're talking about thriving after adversity. And to just be aware that these things can happen when you're suffering from loss. One is improved social connection, or different social connection, deeper social connection. So one is social connection. 2 is an awareness of personal strengths. So we see ourselves in a light that we haven't seen ourselves before, and it can be positive sometimes. 3 is a sense of purpose, that we begin to sense a sense of purpose in our life. 4 is just being appreciative, being grateful about life. So it moves our sense of connection to the life we have. And then the last one is that some people, this isn't for everybody, but some people become more spiritually connected. So again, it's not that there's one system over another or one particular belief, just that we become a little bit more aware of forces outside of maybe what they call the mundane world, that are larger or greater or higher than ourselves, that we are included in. And we begin to feel ourselves more a part of that. So has anyone here ever encountered that experience of thriving in any way after they've experienced loss?
Well, I'm sure many people have, because I mean, this means to me, is not only about grief, right? It's not about losing a person necessarily, but it's about how do you, I mean, it's like about resilience, and it's about, you know, how what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, you know, in a way. I mean, it's about like, you know, and I can see the things that you're talking about. It's when you say more spiritually connected, more socially connected, it's like I'm looking at the protective factors or the domains of vitality, and how, like, in order to keep going and in order to transform the suffering, you're going to need to deepen connection to something, you know, to yourself, to nature, to social, to other people, to God or the universe or your spirituality. You know, it's like you're looking for connection. Like you have to have, you know, there's going to be connection.
Right. And it's not that all of these things happen to all of us, or that any of these things happen. But with regarding our self-care, I think it's important to allow that door to be open. You know, allow ourselves to grow even when we're suffering tremendously.
Tandra says, yes, and I've seen estranged family reconcile and become stronger than before the adversity. Tammy says, yes, resilience. I think these things all come into play for me as I emerge from and accept the experience. And Riette said, I am resonating with a sense of gratitude of life and also being more spiritually connected. And you've heard people often talk about like an illness. There was, I don't know if anybody watches America's Got Talent, but there was a woman on America's Got Talent last night who got cancer, and she's got a 2% chance of living. And she has a beautiful singing voice. And her whole message, I mean, she got the golden buzzer and everything, but her whole message was that she said, you don't have to wait for things to be going well to be happy, you know? And she was bringing this, like, even in the shadow of death, like she was choosing to be joyful, you know? And I feel like, you know, that was, I don't know why it reminded me of that, but you've heard a lot of people who've recovered from cancer say that it was a gift, you know, that what the loss, the grief, but it was a gift ultimately, because it was a teacher, and it taught them where, you know, it taught them about what was really important. And so that's why I can see like the sense of purpose, the grateful for life, the awareness of your strengths, you know, who got you through it, like all of that, you know, is part of grappling with and transcending the experience, and not letting your peace be totally dependent on outside forces, like on what's happening outside, you know. Worth watching. She was beautiful, and her singing
It sounds really moving. Really sounds moving. Incredible.
Janine says the Christian faith teaches us to grieve with hope. This forces one to be more grateful for life and gives purpose during sorrow. Yeah.
And there are many people who've said that you only experience as much joy, as much sorrow as you embrace in your life. So there are many people who've said there's such a connection between the higher places and the lower places in our life, you know, kind of that just depth of contention with life itself. You know, there's one other thing I wanted to share with you, and I hope you guys will let me know if this lands the right way with you, because I can be very, my thoughts can be very symbolic. No light without darkness. Yes. No
That is,
light.
I look for distractions and helping others when I can. Being by myself is when it's hard. And she saw AGT last night.
Oh, you did. So here was my thought.
Show, Judith. It's very uplifting.
I know. Well, I watched the clips from it. I'll watch the clips, you know, they always come up. But anyway, I was thinking that when we are thrown into loss, when we experience any kind of loss, that it's almost like we enter a different time zone, isn't it? And I was thinking, because I like humor, I was thinking about the Twilight Zone. Do you guys remember the Twilight Zone, that show? So I was thinking that it's almost as if you have now entered the Twilight Zone, like where things don't make sense anymore and things are going to move at a pace you can't guess at. And so another example of that, you could think Twilight Zone, and I sometimes think you've entered tree time. So sometimes I look up at the trees and I'm like, I can't see you growing, but you're taller and taller every year, and you're bigger and rounder. And it's as if sometimes I stand really quietly by a tree and it's like, I know that they're in this whole other time than I am. So that's anyway, a very crazy tree story, but Twilight Zone, right? So Twilight Zone is, and I think self-care is about recognizing that a little bit, that you've entered like a little shift of perspective that's going to take as much time as it's going to take. You know, we need patience. The word patience means the calm enduring of suffering. That's what the word patience means.
Really?
We don't always have us in it to be calm. I'll go with that, but that's what patience means. So it's almost like you enter this new place and you've got to sit with your eyes wide open and say, well, where am I? What do I need? What does this situation require of me? And how do I, rise to the occasion? But has anyone else experienced it that way, grief that way?
Experience grief as
a different time zone, a different dimension.
Well, I feel like, to me, maybe it's like just feeling like you're not in your life anymore. Like you're not in, like time stops in a way, and you're not in your normal life, or I'm not in my normal life, so that it's just in like another region. Like I guess I don't know.
Purgatory, just saying.
Or between the worlds, as they say.
Between worlds.
Between the world. And Denise says, COVID grief has taken me to a different time zone. And sometimes, I wonder if you, how do I say this? Like when you said that, Denise, about COVID grief taking you to a different time zone, I just feel like I'm living in a different time zone now than before COVID. I feel like it changed time for me in a way. Like, I don't know if anybody else has that feeling.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because like my whole rhythm is different. Like my whole relationship to activity and to other people and to the world. I did move, and I am living not in the city anymore, so that could be part of it, but time just feels very different. The rhythms of life feel different, and it feels like something shifted in nature, and which throws of grief to a total unknown experience. Yeah, and Ashley says we're experiencing collective trauma in the making. Not that
I agree with that.
Collective trauma in our past too, right? Whew.
Yeah, that is so true. So if you traveled to a new city, it's someplace you've never been before, think about grief almost like that. You're in a completely new space. You need to look around you. You need to kind of take time to get to know the territory. You need to figure out how to keep yourself safe there. You need to figure out how to keep yourself nurtured. And that's what self-care is really about, I think, during that time, is just being willing to have, so this is kind of a Buddhist idea, but being willing to have beginner's mind, to show up newborn. It's a new time, it's a new place. And how do you learn? How do you make it a home again for yourself? And every loss is that way a little bit, I think.
And Tammy says in times of grief, everything else that seems to get put on hold, like that stuff doesn't matter at the moment. And I love it when you said, Judith, that it's like arriving in a new land or a new place that you've never been before. And what do you need to do? And maybe, and it doesn't feel like all that welcoming. I mean, I guess that's the other thing, is it's not like a new land that's like, you know, it's like a scary.
It doesn't have a tourist bureau. Let's put it that. No welcoming committee.
And it doesn't feel welcoming necessarily. So how are you safe there? How can you, take care of yourself there? How can you navigate it without getting more hurt? And Ricardo says, Hola, I have lost both parents, and both times I felt that something died and I never recovered. And also that something was born and I will have it for the rest of my life. #JustSharing.
That's beautiful.
Ricardo. And Esmeralda says, taking care of families in our community as a nonprofit agency has taken a toll on us as advocates. We've been supporting families that have members that have passed away due to COVID. And I found myself reliving my father's passing. And Nicole asked if we could repeat the definition. I think I wrote it in the chat. Patience, because I was really struck by it too, Nicole. Patience is the calm endurance of suffering. And I was thinking about that. I mean, because patience is a virtue, right? And I haven't always been known to be patient. But I'm persistent. So now I understand the difference between persistence and patience. Like I hang in there, but I squawk a lot. Like I don't calmly endure it. I squawk and I complain and I.
Well, you're a force of nature, Kathy. You would.
And I want to change it, but I don't. But that whole patience thing about calmly enduring what's going on is really a beautiful. I can see why it's a spiritual virtue now. So I'm grateful for that definition.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Well, is there anything that anybody else wants to talk about in terms of grief and self-care? Like when you came to this webinar, did you have a question or a concern or an area? We have a few minutes. So do you have an area that hasn't been touched on or something that you'd like to share with the group about self-care and grief? Any needs that people have around that haven't been touched on yet? You can raise your hand or you can type it in the chat.
Grief with children.
Thank you. How do we teach children to grieve? I'm just going to say, okay, when we adopted our child, we were compelled to go through grief counseling because we were adopting an older child who had lost his parents, right? And so we had to go through grief counseling. And what I learned at that time, which I want to check with you if this is still what people think, Judith, is children don't have the capacity to grieve the experience fully when they're young. So they grieve it at every developmental stage. And I saw that with my son as well, that like when he was 8, he grieved the loss of his mother. When he was 10, when he was 12, when he was 15. And it's like the grief process, at least what I was told with children, is extended because they don't. So it's being there with them at every stage, and not being surprised that's happening.
Yeah. And actually, I hate to say this, but the truth is that's true for us as well. I mean, the way grief is not something that ends. That's something we're always taught. I mean, we don't suffer. We're not necessarily suffering the way we do in the beginning of a loss, but mourning is a process that has a pathway, a trajectory that goes off into time. Here's the thing about children. Just because they don't speak our language, just because of an adult brain, you know, they don't have an adult brain, doesn't mean they need to be taught how to do anything. They are doing it. So I saw somebody wrote about children getting into aggressive behaviors, or children, you know, I remember I had one child who was very emotional, and an hour and a half of like, oh my God, weeping. And then you know what? After the hour and a half, he was done. He was done. He was done. That was it. It was over. But that hour and a half was unbelievable. We don't need to teach them. We need to be role models. They're watching us. That's how they learn. So if we try to teach them didactically or through talk, they won't understand the words. Emotionally, they may be too overwhelmed to contain what you're asking them to contain. We need to, what Kathy said, is be with them. We need to witness them. We need to say, you are feeling angry right now. You're feeling sad right now. Are you feeling sad right now? We need to allow them to be creative. That's the language. The language of childhood is nonverbal. It's not verbal. So we need to let them move. We need to let them walk. We need to let them throw balls or throw things. We need to let them make artwork. We need to let them sing.
Yeah, that's what people are, that whole, I mean, we have to end soon. We can maybe pick up this
We
tomorrow.
can pick this up tomorrow because we are talking about watching other people grieve.
So we can talk about children and watching children.
But,
grieve.
and also just one really quick thing is I want to apologize to the lady who said grieving with children, because I think what she was saying is when we're grieving and we have children, which is, it's a very difficult situation. So we can continue talking about this tomorrow.
So Kara, if you meant grief, like when you have children, how do you deal with grieving and having children, being there for children? Yes, we can really talk about more of this tomorrow. So come back tomorrow. Judith is here and it's about watching others grieve, but we will still bring in the self-care and all the other things that are building blocks of the week. And then Friday is a Grief Compass Cafe. Monday, there's a conversation. I'm going to just be here for a conversation on physical vitality and body-based grief. And then Tuesday, Ali is going to be here, another one of our architects of the Grief Compass deck. And he's doing Dreams in Grief and Dying Part 1 and Dreams in Grief and Dying Part 2 on Thursday. And then on Wednesday, it probably won't be me, but one of our Be Strong Family staff will hold space for a conversation on financial vitality and grief, because that's a big issue and it's not one that is popular to talk about, but there's a whole financial piece of when you're navigating grief. So come join us. We have this resource. We want to thank Judith again, one of the architects of this resource, and we will see you next time. Thank you again, Judith, for being here. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you all
for the great conversation.